I'm going to go over the different components of a URL. So with hypertext and HTTP, URL is one of the key components of the web. So I think it's really important to understand the different aspects of the web, and we don't really go over this as much as I'd like to. So I'm just going to try and devote sometimes in the mini lectures or the office hours to do this. So let's go into the anatomy of the URL. So here's different examples of the URL we have up here, right? So we have https developer.mozilla.org. We have developer.mozilla.org/en-us. And then at the end, we have another one with a path that has a query parameter inside of it. Now, we've worked with these different components before, but we've never really broken down what the different aspects are. So the first part over here is we have the protocol. So the protocol or scheme defines what the different mechanism or the translation is going to be in. So in the web, most of the time we're going to be using HTTP, HTTPS. For uploading files, sometimes you'll see FTP as a protocol. Sometimes you'll see SSH. You might see some other things as well. But most of the time when we're dealing with web servers or URLs, we're going to be dealing with HTTP and HTTPS. So this is the protocol. It indicates which protocol the browser must use. Another one is mail to, but don't worry about that. The domain name is what gets translated into an IP address. It indicates which web server is being requested. Most of the time, you're not going to be using the IP address directly. You're going to be using the domain name, which then goes through something called a DNS server in the web. And the DNS server basically translates this domain name to the specific IP address or Internet Protocol address, which resides for every single web address that's out there. Now, there's another part of this that doesn't really go over, and that's a subdomain as well. So within your domain, you have different subdomains. So you can have different parts of an application, such as, www is a standard one, but you could have something like, omar.example.com or peter.example.com. And these represent different parts of your application that you can, split up into different apps, if you will. You'll see more than likely something that says mobile dot and then the application name. And so that represents, hey, this is the mobile version of this application, but essentially it's a different application. Another thing that we have that you're going to see usually on your local machine is the port. It's the technical gate used to access the resources on the web server. So this is usually, the port is prepended to the domain, and it starts with a colon and then a number. Now, by default, the HTTP is set to port 80, and for HTTPS, it's set to 443. So you don't have to write those out explicitly. That's already taken care of for you most of the time. In certain instances where you do have to explicitly put it, then you simply just add it to the URL and you're able to access it at that port. Now on our local machines, we've been using 3000, 8080, and essentially you can use any port you really want to that's not reserved. So there's reserved ports that are in the lower numbers. But generally anything that has more than or 4 digits or more you can use. 3000, 8080 tend to be the most common. Now, the parts of the URL that we generally use to route with are the path. So the path indicates exactly where that resource is located. So the path to a file could be, the path to my file, and this represents, with each / a directory, and finally at the very end, a resource. Now, it's not necessary that a resource exists at a path. It could be that the path will just give you a resource back. So what that means is our system or our server in the back end will basically say, oh, okay, well, the end user, the client, is going to this particular path, and we will then give them back whatever we want to give back if they went to this path. So if you go to path 2, you could have gotten something. If you went path to myfile.html, it could give you myfile.html, or it could give you something completely different. So in the early days of the web, a path like this represented a physical file location on the server. nowadays it's mostly an abstraction handled by web servers without any physical reality. So again, that means that we could give back anything that we want. Before it used to be just like very static deployment kind of thing, or static rendering. We have other parameters. So now these are the query parameters that are passed in after the path. And this is what we work with when we're working with APIs. So the query parameter starts with the question mark. And after that, you pass in key value pairs. So these key value pairs allow you to then pass in information that can be read by the server. And the server can then do something with those key value pairs. So it can find different aspects inside the server, or it can make a query to the database. Whatever you want to do with it, you have that information being sent to you. And finally, we have the anchor. So the anchor essentially is attached at the very end. So after the query parameters, you can say, okay, after this file has been retrieved, go to a specific part in that file. So more than likely, you're going to be using this for IDs. So it says, okay, find this ID and go to it. So when I request this page, it'll not only go to that page, it'll actually go to that specific part in the page that was requested.
Is this first symbol there a dollar sign or an ampersand?
This one is a question mark. This one is a pound.
Pound.
Yes, that is a pound. Yeah, hashtag, pound, whatever you guys want to call it. It's yeah, it's tic-tac-toe. All right, another part. So absolute versus relative URLs. So a absolute URL is going to be something like this, and this is going to be something important because we're going to be going into using both absolute and relative URLs and converting relative URLs into absolute URLs. So Jackie, do you mind just give me so the implicit protocol is something where we assume, based on where we are, that the two forward slashes represent from where we are put in the protocol. So whatever the protocol is, so this is a relative URL, which implicitly puts in the protocol. Now, we have an implicit domain name as well. So this is the most common use case for an absolute URL within an HTML document. The browser will use the same protocol and the same domain name as the one used to load the document hosting the URL. So it isn't possible to omit the domain name without omitting the protocol as well. So if you put in the protocol, but if you put in the protocol without putting in the domain name, you're going to run into an error. So make sure that you omit both if you're going to do that. So what happens is your browser actually is able to render that and say, oh, okay, this relative URL is going to be part of this specific path. So when you have that forward slash refers to the end of the domain name, meaning the start of the path. Yeah.
So I remember in the beginning when you mentioned when you start listing, I guess, different path files in the beginning, we shouldn't use relative because if it's on our local machine, it's fine, but like other people are trying to access it and it has broken links.
So on your local machine, if you're trying to use relative URLs, then you're not going to be able to access it, but only in the case of putting in the specific file path. Meaning that, let's say that you have file // and then you put like the file name and everything like that. That means it's only located on your machine. However, if you use a relative URL, it's actually different than that. That file path actually, it looks like it's a relative URL, but that's an absolute URL to just your local machine. So what you want to do in web development is you actually want to use relative URLs. And relative URLs allow you to then basically have something like, hey, from this is where I want to go. And it'll automatically understand that. And again, if you use the .. // it will take you back, or up a directory. All right, so questions about URL? Yes.
So this is for the, I don't know about extension, the end part. I've seen a lot of people when they have their own portfolios, they use like other countries' extensions.
Yeah, so the .es or like US or something like that.
Is that a huge issue or concern?
That is not a huge issue or concern. That's just a domain name. Okay. So you can actually choose whatever domain name that you want. For instance, let's say that you wanted .io. Whatever you want to use, you can use. Okay. Now, if you wanted to use the country-specific ones, I think the only issue you might run into is if the the country in charge decides to stop you from using that.
Okay.
That's why it's more difficult to actually take down sites like Pirate Bay dot, in like Denmark, right? Because it's registered in Denmark. So you'd have to basically file a complaint formally with the country of Denmark, be able to go through that process in order to be able to take it down, and then they could just reapply and then put that in like Spain or something like
Okay,
that.
so
Yeah.
you're going to do gray area work. That's how you.
Yes, gray area work. You can call it that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
The other thing I want to ask is, when you're doing the ports,
Yeah.
you're starting to open a bunch of different ports. Does it allow like vulnerabilities or security issues?
So the question is, if you're trying to open up a lot of different ports on your local machine, it's not an issue. If you have multiple ports, the best and most secure way to actually set a port is to use HTTPS, because this actually has you create an SSL certificate.
Okay.
And what that does is essentially you register an SSL certificate, you answer certain questions about your website, and then you get both a private key and a public key. Now the public key is then matched against your private key, and so your site is actually listed as being secure. Like for instance, you have this over here as being a secure site, and Chrome recognizes it as a secure site because it's using HTTPS. But they actually have to go through a process to prove that it's a secure site. And so transactions between that mean that only my data is encoded between myself and the server. HTTP, however, is not encoded between, so it's not necessarily as secure. All right.
The subdomain is the first part, the www.
Correct. So implicitly, the subdomain is usually www, but notice in this one, actually, it's not. On these, in this URL, we actually have developer.mozilla.org. So it's another application, but using the same domain name, right? So the subdomain is actually different, but it's still the same domain. So if I registered my domain with something, I can have multiple subdomains. Now I'd have to have servers still being able to render these different things, but I can have as many subdomains as I want on it. So generally, if it's like one company, if they have like multiple applications for that same product and they're related, maybe this is developerdocs.mozilla.com. Another one is the browser.mozilla.org or something like that. Then you have just different subdomains that you can go to.
And there's really no limit to how many you can establish.
Essentially, yes.
Another question. So why doesn't everything just have HTTPS?
So the question is, why doesn't everything have HTTPS? It depends. Most sites actually do have HTTPS unless they're most big sites like Google, LinkedIn. So if I go to linkedin.com, it's going to be HTTPS. It's going to be secure. If I go to Facebook, it's going to be HTTPS. If I go to Reddit, it's going to be HTTPS. If I go to, what are some other ones? I don't know, just any. Yeah, Amazon, small.amazon.com. So, HTTPS. But if I go to maybe like some mom and pop shop, they might not need HTTPS because they don't really care about security. They don't really want to register their application. But most larger applications, they will have HTTPS.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's all about laziness and wanting to actually set up that SSL certification.
Bollywood Bytes does not have.
But Bollywood Bytes probably does not give two shits about security. They will definitely not need it. Yeah.
Does it matter just in terms of like their client often if they see your website that it's
For a SaaS application, meaning the most application we're creating is a software as a service, you would preferably have HTTPS because you're gonna have login, you're gonna have credentials, you're gonna have back and forth. You're definitely gonna want to have HTTPS.
How about portfolio page?
Portfolio page, not really. Nah, it doesn't really matter. Because portfolio page, you're not having a lot of exchange of data, right? So your data doesn't really need to be secure. You're just essentially it's like a static site. Fuck. All right. How do I close this? Did it stop already? I don't know what happened.
So it would be better for a company to have just like a bunch of different subdomains as opposed to like their website.com and then slash, whatever, homepage or contact or.
Wait, what happened? Hold on.
It would be better to have like a subdomain like
Username.
contact.mozilla as opposed to like mozilla.com/contact. contact.
No. So pages within the same application should be within the path.
Okay.
If you want to have completely different applications that are still part of the same product, like let's say dashboard analytics, things like that, or a mobile version of the same application or the same product, then but still a different application, then that's what you do.
So, is
So,
that for
Like Reddit has that, I think, right? Mobile.reddit.com. Did they? Or did they stop that? No, they stopped that. Never mind.
is that for efficiency or
Oh, is it M? Huh? What is it?
Is it for efficiency or for organization?
For organization purposes. And, well, both, I guess you can do. No, m.reddit doesn't take me. Oh, I think it does an auto check to see, like, if I'm on a browser or, on a desktop or not. Let me just save this real quick. So this is what? URL.